Hello, hello. It is Tuesday night. You're here with the People's Pride Project, and that means we are bringing you. I keep saying we, y'all. It's me. The we is coming, but it's me right now. We're bringing you another lovely, lovely couch conversation. And this week's guest, so excited because y'all know how we get with academia and education and how important that is. And today we have a guest that can bring you that. I'm talking about Miss Shauna Brown, the founder, the owner, the CEO of Teach for the Culture. Now, she has been an educator for 20 years, so she knows what she's talking about. And I am very, very proud to be able to not just sit down with her and have her on the couch, but have her talk to y'all, because this is what it's really about. So, how you doing? How you doing?
Hello, hello, hello. Thank you for having me so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for being here. Now, as is typical with our couch conversations, like I said, we're super casual around here. There's no tone policing. There's no none of that. You're just talking to the homies.
All right.
So, let's start with the obvious first question. What made you feel the need or this idea to create Teach for the Culture?
Oh, that's a great question and one of my very favorites. So, as you mentioned in the intro, I have been in education for at least for almost 20 years. Um, in the field right now, only 8%, a little less than 8% of all educators or all certified teachers in the United States are Black educators. Less than 1% Indigenous, approximately 7% Latino, Latinx. And so it may in certain areas look like we're, in a lot of numbers. In some states, we're 2%, 3%. I'm in Connecticut right now. Black educators are 3.9% of the total teaching force in Connecticut, and it's 90% white. And
Yes.
so, in a lot of spaces, if you are a Black educator or an educator of color, it can feel very isolating. You can be the only one. It can feel like, not a lot of people understand you. It can feel like sometimes you're fighting alone. In schools, even where the students are predominantly of color, but the staff are predominantly white. And so it's a constant feeling of like navigating spaces and advocating or feeling alone. In some places, again, in some places you may have 80% staff of color, but that is not really the norm across the United States.
Right.
And so one of the reasons I created Teach for the Culture was to build community around that, to help educators know that they have other people they can connect with, that they share experiences with, um, and just that they're not alone in this. Teach for the Culture also to me is not just a brand, but it's a call to action.
Mhm.
And so when I say Teach for the Culture, it's not just the present, but it's connecting the past, the present, and the future. It's calling people to action and to really tap in to the brilliance and the genius that's within our communities, and to make sure that our youth are receiving the education that they deserve.
I love that. I do. Because I'm sure as most people right now, I stumbled across you on Instagram. And, typical internet creep, I'm like following people and I'm just like, yo, she's really like, she's talking. Like, I was thoroughly impressed. And you're saying you're in Connecticut. I'm in North Jersey. So I can
Okay.
definitely
Okay.
relate to the being the fly in buttermilk, not having any teachers of color, period, until I was in college.
Mm,
So the idea that it shouldn't be the exception, it should be the norm,
that's
especially
right.
as we're creating more diverse environments.
Yes.
Representation matters. It sounds like a corny
Absolutely.
slogan, but you have to see yourself in order to see yourself.
Absolutely.
So I
Absolutely. So that was a big part of kind of why I created Teach for the
Mhm.
Culture. In addition to that, also just um, getting to spread the messages, spread the word about advocacy within the field, about, like you said, the need for representation within the profession, within the field, and just helping people see themselves in their educators and in what they're learning. So
Mhm. Um, let's talk about. decolonizing education? Because I know our typical American education
Mhm.
is very dominant of a certain complexion, of a certain, it's a Eurocentric education.
That's right.
So how, especially this is very pertinent with regard to the time we're now talking about critical race theory, like, oh my God, this big boogeyman in the room. Um, how do we enter into that space to talk about decolonizing? Because that seems like a new idea.
Okay, so I think it's been, I don't want to say it's an old idea, but it may not have been phrased or coined in the same way.
Mhm.
But I think it's something that our ancestors have been doing for centuries. And so when I think about decolonizing education, it's not only in schools, but it's what we do in our communities, is what we do in our homes, because learning takes place in all those spaces. And colonization has reached into all those spaces. Like if you grew up in the United States, you have breathed the air of colonization because that's what we were built on. That's what our experience has been for, within the dominant society. And thinking about colonization in itself, so Europe, which is 8%, it takes up 8% of the total world's landmass, has colonized over 80% of the world. And so with that colonization, so
Yeah.
80%, they're 8% of the
Mhm.
landmass, and they have colonized 80% of the world. A huge part of that colonization was through education also.
Mhm.
So they knew, so they also took over by force, but they also knew that colonization also starts with the mind. And so within our schools, that institution for learning, that's where a lot of the colonization actually took place because they were able to get into the psyche of people, to have people believe that, you know, things should be centered around Europe. And that includes, instructional practices, what they're seeing in the curriculum, the way things are taught, the rules, the structures, all of that within the formal, institutions of school in the United States are colonial structures. And so part of breaking that down, as I said, first is like just knowing your own history, especially as Black and Indigenous people, knowing your own history, embracing your own culture, learning about your own culture, your history, your people, embracing those things. That is, to me, that is like a huge part of decolonizing. Because again, colonization is centered around Europe and everything was like European driven.
Mhm.
They wanted people to assimilate and forget about their culture, forget about the history because they knew about the power of your culture and your history. And if we just embrace that and take it back and show love for who we are, that to me is a big part of colonizing, decolonizing. But I know you wanted to say
Oh,
something.
it's okay. I like to listen and I just roll with it. But I like the idea or the way you express the fact that education isn't just the books you learn at school.
That's right.
You know, the big part, we're always like, well, I'm educated because I went to college and I have 17 degrees and I have this and I have that, but you have no knowledge of self.
Right.
You know, the you don't, what did Rafiki say? You don't even know who you are.
That's right.
But so the idea of educating yourself on where you come from, who you come from, what that looks like is just as important, if not more important, than what you would learn in a building on a curriculum or as part of a curriculum. Because if you don't know who you are,
Absolutely.
your perspective shifts based on what you're reading, what
Yeah.
you're learning, or what you're being force fed.
Exactly. 100% agree. 100% agree. And so like that knowledge of self is key. It's critical. It's also, as you may know, one of the five elements of hip hop, which I love. So knowledge of self, like that's why to me, even hip hop is a big part of decolonization and everything that has come from us, everything that has come from our communities and has been born out of our communities that
Mhm.
ties back to our culture. It helps us in the process of decolonizing.
Let's talk about hip hop as a learning tool. you know, 80s baby, 90s raised me. That's where I come from. Um, the commodification of hip hop is so crazy to me
Mm-hmm.
because we are music, we are
Yes,
sound, we
that's
come
it.
from griots and storytelling. That's how we learn.
Mm.
So now it turns into a money making thing, and it's you have to talk about this, and you have to sell this image, and you have to. We have to get in the mindset to pull it apart and
Yes,
recognize knowing what it came from, knowing why we do like this, knowing why those beats and rhythms make something happen up here.
yes,
And I think it's so important because so much of us, oh, take it out of the schools. It shouldn't but that's how we learn.
that's right.
That's how we've learned for generations.
Hmm.
So go
And
ahead.
just like you said, so when they say take it out of the school, because they understand the power, they
Mm-hmm.
understand the power of that. That is who we are. It is
Mm-hmm.
within us. And once that's activated within us, that again, that genius within, once it's activated, we're unstoppable. And so, yeah, they said take it out of the schools because it didn't come from them. And part of, the colonial strategy is to make sure everything that they're feeding comes from them and centers upon Europe and the European way. It's not our way. So part of the colonial way was to reject everything that was not European, to say that it was bad, to say it's negative, to vilify it
Mm-hmm.
and glorify everything that came from Europe. Hip hop is us. We are hip hop. And so by them saying take it out of the school, yeah, because it they know the power of it. They understand that. And even them trying to control the narrative around it and commodify
Mm-hmm.
it, that's all part of the colonial strategy. I think. So
The fact that you said it only makes up 8% of the actual landmass or the actual, but it's this overarching umbrella of supremacy that has enveloped the world's consciousness is boggling to me
hmm.
because I understand it. Obviously, if you're makes a lot of sense. If you are small in numbers, how can you create the most control?
Hmm.
So realistically, yes, melanated individuals of all flavors, shapes, sizes, or whatever you choose to classify yourself as, we are the global majority.
That's right.
So you almost have to. I mean, the only way you could get off this grand scheme of taking everything over is to get into the hearts and minds of
That's
the
it.
people.
That's it. That's the biggest war is on the psyche.
Absolutely.
The attack on the psyche, that they're trying to control the mind, and they know if they could control the mind, they could control our actions. And so I think the fight has always been against, especially Black people and people of color. The fight has always been against um, us being able to develop our minds.
Yes.
Like from the beginning of that has always been the fight. That was the fight when they, took us to these shores and enslaved Black people. That they wanted to ensure that number one, our culture was forgotten. We weren't allowed to play the drum, which has been part of
Mhm.
us and our culture and our roots and way of communicating, and that we were not allowed to read. Again, trying to control the mind, trying to have us forget our past, um, and so that they could try to dominate and control.
We actually have a question regarding hip hop. So I would argue that some of that has been lost in modern day hip hop in an effort to appeal to colonial audiences. So how do we get that back?
Hmm.
You want to go
I
first?
I think well I can start at least or say my little piece, and then I would love to hear your perspective as well. But I think part of that is goes back to knowledge of self, knowledge of where it came from, knowledge of why hip hop even developed, what was happening, like the historical context, what was happening in the South Bronx in 1979 when hip hop, came to like what was happening then?
Hmm.
Why was it developed? And then even examining like how it has changed over time and following the money part of it too.
That's
So
right.
like, how does it connect to economics and capitalism? and all of that. And so when we start asking questions and digging deeper, um, we're able to come to a better understanding and start to unpack and unroot some of that.
Absolutely. As far as how do we get it back, definitely agreeing with knowledge of self and understanding of the historical perspective. But we got to stop being a slave to the money.
Oof.
We're in, first of all, ghettos are created, poverty is created,
Hmm.
the misogyny is created.
That's right.
So these things that you're like, yo, I got to make this music so I can get out of, you're put there
Mm-hmm.
to create this turmoil.
Mm.
So now they come out, well, I can give you X if you just say this, or
Right.
you sell this, or you do this,
Mm-hmm.
and that'll get you out of the crazy. So it's like, do I think of what I do for myself? Let me put myself on, let me get out? Or do I say, you know what, I'm gonna go about it a different route because I'm not selling my soul for fast money.
That's right. That's it.
So to me, once that becomes more of the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
that's the only way we're going to get back to that.
That's it. That's it. And everything that we see is created like intentionally. Like you said, like ghettos were created, even the economic situation that many people are in. And
Hmm.
so they feel like if they dangle this, hey, if you do this and do that, basically sell your soul, we'll give you this.
Hmm.
And if you put people in a situation where they feel desperate or where
Yes.
they're, in need, it's like, some people just fall into that trap.
Desperation is a catalyst for so many
Hmm.
horrible decisions. Like that, and it's crazy not even to think, but when you recognize that these are the strings that are being pulled, like
Right.
these desperate situations are created. There's not a lack of food.
Exactly.
There's not a lack of housing. There's strategic roadblocks to them. There's not a lack of any of it.
Mm-hmm.
So then if you create all these problems and you wonder why the pot bubbles over, I mean, you get the water too hot, it's going to happen.
That's right.
So absolutely.
That's right. I love that question though, for whoever asked that question. I love the question.
It was a very good question. Thank you, Shea. And for those that are watching, go ahead and give StreamYard permission so we can actually acknowledge who's asking the questions because any of y'all could be Facebook user number one. I want to know who we're talking to. So that would be much appreciated. Okay. So in throughout the course of your career, have you seen more of a shift um toward decolonization, or is this just something people are tiptoeing around? Like, what have you seen?
Oh, okay. Wow. I love this question too. So I would say that it's been different based on like the different places I've worked in. So I've worked in three different states, a few different schools. I worked at the state level, the district level, and it's been different. It's been different everywhere. So before the term, so like I said, I started teaching like almost 20 years ago. Before the term like decolonization was even kind of a thing, if you would, the schools I worked in back then were doing more to decolonize without even calling it that.
Okay.
So there was like more of a focus on, you know, histories outside of Europe. So, especially Black history, African history, there's more of a focus on that in those places. I started off teaching in Philly. I
Mhm.
worked in Brooklyn. I worked in Hartford, Connecticut, and then I've worked in other places, other areas in Connecticut, and at different levels. So elementary, middle school, high school, and middle have been the longest.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's been different everywhere. And again, based on like who are the people in the building.
Right.
So like the schools that were predominant, that had like a lot of staff of color,
Hmm.
that's where I saw more of a focus on the knowledge of self and a non-European centered way of doing things. And the schools that have been predominantly white, I've seen kind of the opposite.
Right. You bring
So
up a very good point in that as far as seeing the opposite. I'm sorry if I'm extra fidgety today. Um, just speaking from my personal experience, grew up Whitebread America. Like, where's the black people in town? My house. That's it. That was it. So the idea, um, not even the idea, but the execution of trying to, be more culturally aware and culturally diverse was pretty much a joke. Like, even when they claimed that they were doing it, it was more so, let's give that one book so that one black kid is happy
mm,
and we'll go on about the rest of our day. And even now, I believe it was last month, the town board of education had a huge uproar because they'd wanted to read The Hate You Give in class.
mm,
Meanwhile, we've been reading Huck Finn and all of these other books that have no problem pointing fingers and calling niggas.
right.
But when you want to flip the script and read something that they deem too urban,
Mm-hmm,
clutch your pearls. How dare you ask for that?
mm-hmm,
Meanwhile, the statistics of the town have begun to shift. There's brown people popping up. Brown folks got money. Oh, we can live here. Hey, you know. So the idea of bringing those things into the school system, there's definitely still a pushback. And like I
yeah,
said earlier with the critical race theory, why are we afraid to teach truth? Why are we afraid to
that's right.
teach the reality of the country that we're living in or that we've come from?
Mm-hmm,
We want to teach patriotism, but we don't want to tell the truth.
that's right.
So,
That's right. Yeah, and I think it goes back to like domination and control of the mind. That's what they're afraid of. Um, they know the power within the communities of the global majority, and if they do teach the truth, they're afraid that we may treat them how they've treated us over the last 400 years. So, yeah, I truly believe it's still about that domination and control. And the main way to control the people is to control the mind. The main institution by which to do that is through the schooling system, in addition to media, in addition to messages, movies, and just everything around us.
which in a broader sense is all education, even though we call it different things.
That's
That's,
right.
you know, that's how you're informing your opinions and your lifestyles
Mhm.
and everything else. So that makes absolute sense.
Yeah.
Um, I just had a question and it flipped out my brain. Hold on now. Um, yeah, it's gone. It's gone.
That's all right. Yeah.
But with
So,
go ahead.
go ahead.
Do you find that certain age groups or certain academic levels are easier to negotiate with regard to broadening the perspective, or you just feel like across the board there's kind of it's already
Um, I think there has to definitely be a will. So,
mm-hmm,
like, no matter what level,
mm-hmm,
there has to be the will.
mm-hmm,
In some places, there's a lot of resistance, and that resistance can, come in the form of silence. It can come in the form of actual pushback. It can come in the form of legislation, as we're seeing now, like and how we've seen historically, like which laws are being passed and how do those laws affect different communities and what is taught and what's not taught, what's included, what's not included. It's like a whole political system, and it's so multifaceted, multi-layered, and deep and
mm-hmm.
institutionalized. So I find that yeah, it just depends on, again, like where and the will and the driving kind of force behind what makes that institution run. Um, I think on the college level there is a bit more autonomy with professors and instructors, within like what they teach and what they include in their syllabi. But again, if they weren't educated in a way that is more expansive and broadened, or they don't have the knowledge of self or knowledge of other cultures outside of Europe, then they're more likely to continue teaching the way they were taught and kind of have everything else on the periphery, on the margins, and center, the European way. But
Do
I
you,
think, but there's also, for me, there's like power in the students,
mm,
lots of power in the students, communities, and parents. And I think we have to be ones to push that. Like as a high school student, um, I'm 16, 15, 16 years old, and we're organizing protests. We actually got Black Studies put in our high school from the student push. We were
wow,
able to get African American history, African American literature. They had a cheerleading team, but no drill team. We were able to get a drill team. We were able to to get them to hire more Black staff. And it came from us as young people, 15, 16, 17 years old. We were the ones who pushed it and pushed it and pushed it. Um, we even like organized protests, like petitions, all of that stuff. And so I think once communities know that they have that power, parents know they have the power, because they're paying. I mean, especially for public education, we're
mhm.
funding, right? For people who are on the board of education who make the policy, we're voting them in or voting them out. So there's power in the community, but we have to like recognize that and use it to drive the change we wish to see. And I think that's where we can start seeing some more change at different levels. But I think if we just wait for other people to do it, they're not going to do
Like,
it.
apathy is going to get us nowhere.
Yeah.
Do you feel that instructors should willingly want to evolve, or do you think that it should be part of whatever training they receive? Like, no, this has to be done.
Yeah, but I think there has to be a will,
Hmm.
but there also has to be the will to educate yourself. Like, again, if you just wait for the training, you're going to get whatever they choose to give you, right? Especially if you're part of an institution. But if you have to be willing to like do your own research, do your own learning, your own training, your own travel, the world experience, like all of that contributes to how you see yourself and how you see people around you, and then in turn, how you're able to facilitate learning experiences for others.
I think that becomes not a testament, but that becomes part of, are you teaching for a job, or are you
Mhm.
teaching for the passion or the desire to really contribute to what's happening in society around you? Because if you're just in it for a check or just something to do, or I always wanted to be a teacher, not
Right,
even really thinking of what necessarily goes into that,
right.
I don't think that doing the extra is going to really happen.
All right, I definitely agree.
And you're seeing so many educators getting burned out in the process.
Hmm.
So, is there a way to combat that part of it? Like, I want to change the world, but I can't do it by myself. That, what do you do in those instances?
So again, agree 100%. And going back to kind of my why for creating Teach for the Culture, that is part of it. Because you can't do it by yourself. You are going to get burnt out. Like you have to work within, like it has to be a community effort. So when you're tired, you can rest. Somebody else got you. Like the movement is going to keep going. That's the African way. We've been doing this for centuries. We are collective people. Most people of color across the globe are come from collective cultures.
Hmm.
And it is like it's the European way is individualistic. Oh, I can't do it. I have, it's all about self. We are all about us, community.
Yes.
So we have to move together. Like that will help to prevent burnout and just being community with others, being able to talk to others, strategize with others, being able to just be in community like that will help to, I think, prevent some of the burnout. Just not thinking that you have to do it all on your own, because it can't be done by one person. It can't be done in 1 year. It's a continuum, and we just have to keep working in community to get things done.
It also takes, sometimes you can't do it all by yourself, but there has to be at least one that's willing to do it. And I think that's the scary part because people are concerned with job security. No one wants to be ostracized. No one wants to be, the squeaky wheel most of the time. But there is a level of courage that's necessary, and especially in our
Mhm.
community, because it's always the one that stands up that they want to go after, and they
Mhm.
make it a point to go after.
Mhm.
So I understand the fear aspect, but how do we work around that?
And do you mean in like in terms like within jobs and schools or just like at large, like in the community?
With regard to trying to almost force the change in schools, because you are talking about your job, you are talking about how you feed your family, like we're talking about the desperation of it.
Mhm.
So how do we combat that if there's nothing in place and you have to be the first? Are there any protections? Are there, what do you do?
I think just first, even before thinking about like forcing a change,
Hmm.
just like knowing yourself and changing yourself and being the change. Like just starting there. Because I think a lot of times we try to start with, okay, I'm gonna have this person do this, and they gotta do this, and they're not. No, start with you. Like each person has to start with themselves. You may have accountability partners, and again, you're working in community, but you gotta start like just be the change. Be what you want to see, the exact thing you want to see, you gotta be it. So whether that be in the way you show up, and how you kind of manifest that freedom, how you pursue liberation, whatever it is, be that first and then build and work with others to continue pushing forward. But I think because sometimes, like, if you're only trying to force change and force other people, you are going to get burnt out quickly. And guess what? You're not going to be showing up as your full whole self because you're too busy trying to force everything else around you. So just, I say, start with you. Start, we have to start with ourselves.
You've used the word liberation a couple times already. So how does the educational environment, or shifting the educational environment, how does that relate to the broader idea of liberation for Black and Brown people?
Woo! Child, you speaking today. Oh my gosh. So that's like the current, I think the current institution of schools, it's not, it's more about control than liberation.
Hmm.
So it's not about freedom at all. It's about replicating um, people to become workers and to
Hmm.
become just people who are both assimilated and just controlled and just fit into society to feed into capitalism, basically. Like a more liberatory system is a system that teaches you how to not just work for someone else, but how to create, how to thrive, not just how to survive during, 9 to 5 and how to fit
Hmm.
into the system, but how to create new structures and new systems and thrive on your own and thrive within, as a part of a community, not just as a token or a chip within the whole capitalistic system, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Um, but yeah, liberation to me, it's not like the school's not set up for that right now at all. It's set up to mold you a certain way. It gives you certain knowledge. Um, and so for me, again, it has to be way beyond what we're learning in school, way beyond what the curriculum says. Um, we have to be willing, especially as people of color, we have to be willing to like move outside of that system and continue to create and build with our communities and not just like depend on the school system to give it to us because they're not. And I've been in the system, like like I said, almost 20 years. It's not set up for that. It's really not, sadly. So, but again, we have to be the ones to change and to do our parts, whatever that looks like within our lanes, within our field of expertise, whatever it is, like we have to do our parts.
I completely agree with that. I do. So, okay, I have a twofold question. If we were to work within the current system, aside from knowledge of self, what would we have to do to make the necessary adjustments. On the flip side of that, right now is the big moment. Everybody wants to start their own community. We're all buying land, we're living in the woods and doing it ourselves. Um, what do we need to keep in mind with regard to education if we're starting from the ground up? Like, okay, we want to, you have, it's kind of the Du Bois Booker T situation all over again with regard to we're going to work within this system and play their game, or we just going to say, okay, this is what we're going to do. Well, that's more Garvey than Booker T, but it's the same sort of thing. And do our own thing. Like, how do you work on either of those levels with regard to education?
Yeah, I think it does have to be both at the same time. And it's I think a very like nuanced approach, and also like based on what we need. So we have to be able to say, like, these are the things that we need. These are things that we would like. These are things that we would like to see. And then start to pull, okay, how are we going to do this at this level? How do we do that at the 3 to 5 year old level? How do we do that at the middle school, high school, or whatever structure it is? How do we do that beyond, post-secondary? How do we, so it's defining it for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So besides, in addition to like knowing ourselves, it's kind of like, one of the Kwanzaa principles, Kujitagale, is self-determination. So we're determining for ourselves what we want to see and how we're going to go about that. And we have to come together to do it. I think that's one of the things that I would love to see more of. Just people coming together to actually define and determine and help to pave the way forward.
Absolutely. Where, as we're creating these new curriculums and these new um, stories about what education is, what should we be pulling from? Like, where we have a Eurocentric curriculum, we understand what they want us to learn. But if we're talking about being true to who we are as a people, what would our education system, or what do you imagine our education system would look more like?
So part of it for me goes back to like understanding like our cultural backgrounds. Black people, as you know, are in no way a monolith. Um, but going back and looking at those elements globally and across the diaspora that make us who we are, and pulling from those things, like building upon those things, and not saying like it has to be exactly the way it was, or
Mm-hmm.
keeping only the traditional way, but building upon those things. So like you mentioned, or we mentioned earlier, like hip hop and the elements of hip hop, and how that has been a part of us. The boom bap didn't start like in the South Bronx. That's from Africa.
Mm-hmm.
That is part of who we are. Like um just our ways of being, our ways of loving, our ways of healing, our ways of connecting. We were the first, as you know, like mathematicians and scientists, like tapping into all of that genius and building upon it to move us forward. So I think we start there in my mind. That's just kind of, the way I think about it. Like we start there and we build from that, as opposed to starting at a different content or from a different people or from colonial rule and starting from there. We got to start from who we are and
Mm-hmm.
building from there. So much genius, I think, is just within our communities that has to be like tapped into and not looked upon as less than, because that's the whole colonial narrative,
Right.
right? So like movement, the way we do things, call and response, like there's so many different things, so many different elements that are just part of who we are. I'm talking specifically to like Black cultures, the African diaspora right now. Um, that they deem as less than, other than, not good enough, not appropriate. No, that's who we are. So like going back to that, embracing it and building upon it, to me that's kind of the way to go.
To me, that brings to mind flip, and this is something that's dear to my heart. Maybe it's because I'm kind of a jerk, but it's whatever. The idea of respectability politics, this recognition of I don't have to live in the box that you say is what it
Mhm.
should be.
Mhm.
This is who I am. This is what works for me. This is what calls to my soul. So we can work in parallel to get things
Mhm.
done if that's what necessary, but I don't have to assimilate to what your idea of who I am or even my
Mhm.
style of learning should be.
That's right.
Yeah, because I'm a kick down walls type of person. I'm like, I ain't doing that. I'm gonna go over here, figure out what works for me, and I'll get back to you. Maybe.
That's right. And that's part of being free. Like
Yes.
there are other communities that do that and there's no problem, no issue, right? It's just when it comes to other
Say
people.
it.
Oh, nope, that's
Say
not
it.
that's not this. You got to be this way. Why?
Say it.
There's many other communities that they show up as themselves.
And dare you to say something.
Yeah, yeah. So
Meanwhile, we got a huckabuck and shuck and jive to get through the door. And
yeah,
look, what are you doing here?
yeah. Not for that. Mm-mm.
Mm-mm, no, no, not at all.
Not for it. But yeah, and that's to me that's part of like again like freedom and being able to be your full self, being able to show up as your full authentic self. That's
Yes.
part of being free. Like, and we're so used to not having that and having to assimilate or having to, you know, put on a certain
Mm-hmm.
mask or clothes to act a certain way, all stiff and all crazy. And then we
Mm-hmm.
get home and we're like, no, like this, that's too much.
Isn't
That's
it?
too
It's
much.
exhausting.
It's exhausting. Yeah.
It really is. And it's like, how you want me to be the token Negro and be good at it? I can't do that if I'm pretending the whole time. Like, that is exhausting. So we do
Yeah.
have another question. When we live in such a capitalistic society, what do you think will be the impetus for changing the way we educate our children?
Ooh.
Oh, shucks now.
I don't see. You want to start with this one?
Go for it.
So currently, there is really no big impetus for us to change. And that for
Mm,
me showed up big, big, big over this last 2 years with the pandemic.
oh,
Like big, big. Like the whole push for us, like so in my area, we went back to school in person and live last August 2020.
mm,
So numbers were still high, they're still out of control. People were still figuring out how to do and how to manage the whole pandemic. And they were like, nah, go back to school. Go back in. Go back. And that was because it was so businesses could reopen. It was
right,
so people could go back to work and we could go back to business as normal, business
right.
as usual. Again, feeding right into capitalism. So to me, the impetus, like, it's not really there. It's not. It's just the system we live in. So we have to make it a priority for us, care for ourselves and care for each other and not wait on somebody else. Because really, well, you said I could cuss on here. I'm not gonna cuss. They
Go
don't,
for
they
it.
don't give a f. They don't give a
Go
fuck
for it.
about us.
Do not censor yourself. Say
They
what.
don't care. They don't care. They don't. So we got to care for us.
Yes.
Like there is no impetus. And I love that question, but we got to care for self and others.
I like that you said that because really, if we're waiting for a catalyst, if there hasn't been enough of a catalyst yet to get your behind up off the couch,
Hmm.
sorry, y'all, you're waiting for Jesus. Like, if nothing that has happened up to this point has given you enough to put fire under your ass and say this has to change,
Hmm.
capitalism or not, that still goes back to being a slave to the money.
Hmm.
Like we're so worried about, and I get it. We want to support our families. We don't want to struggle. There's so many layers of black and brown people, especially black people in America. This idea of what it looks like to climb out of the struggle or to try to
Mm,
distance ourselves from slavery.
mm,
So we're doing all of this extra so we don't look like who they said we were.
mm-hmm,
But
mm,
if with all that's going on, especially in the last 2 years, like you can always be like, oh, that's history. You're seeing history happen right in front of your face.
right.
And if that's not enough to make you move,
Mm-hmm,
you're not going to.
mm,
So it really has to be a decision. You can't sit there and wait for something to show up out the sky and be like, okay, now's a good time.
right. Yeah, it's not gonna happen. Like
Never.
that's what we were built on. That's what this whole country was built on. It's in the very thread of our existence as a nation. It's not just gonna happen overnight. I think I think there's been, especially over the last 2 years, when more people are like realizing that and opening their eyes to it. Um, I think from within, especially, there's been more, like you're seeing a lot of like staff turnover right now. You're seeing more people homeschooling, unschooling, more people like realizing like, no, this is not for me, and like peace. You're
Right.
seeing more of that right now because people are realizing how the system in a lot of ways has been unhealthy for a lot of people. And so we're making other choices and creating new lanes, which I think is part of what we have to continue to do also.
I also think, in addition to that, the shock and awe of the pandemonium has given people the closest that they're going to get to an impetus because it's like, yo, people are dying out here. Like,
Mm,
I don't have time. It could be anybody, it could be me.
mm, yeah,
So, if anything, I think that's giving people the permission to make these shifts. Whereas
mm,
we're like, oh, I can't do that. You can do whatever you want to do.
right, right.
You're not allowing yourself to. It goes back to being the good little soldier and the cog in the wheel. And, don't challenge the status quo, don't challenge authority.
Mm,
Instead of saying, okay, is my autonomy more important? And while this might be slightly off topic, the fact that we're so afraid to show up fully in and of and as ourselves
mhm,
is why we have so many of these additional struggles.
mm,
Trying to fit into these boxes that were never built for us, weren't built
mhm,
by us, and we're
mhm,
just continuing to support them because we think it'll get us farther than where we already are,
right. Hmm.
creates so many of the extra snowball effects, even with just, personal wellness and mental health and all of
Yeah,
these things that we're
yeah,
constantly struggling with. So it really, really is a layered system.
it is. It really is. And we just have to unpack it piece by piece to me and just beginning right here with ourselves, with our families, like our immediate surroundings, and then piece by piece. It's
Absolutely.
so much. It's so much to it, and it's a lot to it. But like you said, and like I said earlier, like it starts in the mind. Because like you said, like who told you have to? You don't have to do that. So it's being able to like see other avenues also in other ways. Sometimes people just need a blueprint of how to at least move away from the things that we think are tying us down. They have to see other avenues out. So, but
Absolutely.
yeah, it's a lot. It's a whole lot, but it's not impossible.
There you go.
Again, there are a lot of examples of people freeing themselves. So
Because
yes.
we have to.
Hmm.
We have to. That's the premise of what the People's Pride Project is. This is my heart's work. Like, yo, you do not need to chain yourself to these predetermined conditions and systems. And I tell you're an infinite being. There is a freedom that
That's right.
you are entitled to. If we're going to say we're entitled to anything, you are entitled to show up exactly as who you are.
That's it.
Now, that doesn't mean cause harm and destruction and chaos to everyone around you. You didn't show up to be an asshole. You showed up to
Right.
be you know. But this is so, we forget this, or we try to bury it, and it does more harm than good.
Hmm.
So as for me, I say community care and self-care, they hold hands, they work together.
That's right.
The better you take care of yourself, the more of an asset. It doesn't change your value, but it makes you
Right.
more of an asset. You can help. You
That's
know,
right.
you can be a beacon. You can be a representative
That's right.
because you've done the work for yourself. And just as much,
Hmm.
you need the community to be there as that reflection of you. Like, yo, we
Absolutely.
got you. So go ahead and knock your head a couple times. We're still
Right.
here. We're
Right.
not we're not turning our back on you because you messed up.
Right.
Unless you really fuck up, then you on your own.
Hmm.
But there's a synergy that has to happen. And because we have adopted this Eurocentric way of thinking that every man is an island and it's only what I can do for myself, and oh, it makes me a bum if I need a handout, because it's not a handout. Asking for help
Right.
is not a handout,
That's right.
you know? So it's nuanced and it's a lot, and I'm not going to go off on some angry tangent.
So, but it needs to be, and like, and spaces like these, where we're bringing the conversations out, and is bringing issues out. I think it's part of our healing, as the
Yes.
collective. Definitely. So I definitely love the things that you're doing with the People's Pride Project, and
Thank you.
hosting all these conversations on the couch.
Listen, I like to keep it easy. And that's part of, for me, the importance. At the end of it, at the soul of it, I don't care how many degrees you have. I don't care what titles you have, where you come from, who your mom and them are.
Hmm.
We're all in this same position trying to work through this humanity, right?
That's right.
So if I'm closing doors in your face and you're closing doors in my face, there's no way for what needs to happen
That's right.
to be able to really happen. So yeah,
That's right.
we kicking on the couch, we
That's
sitting
right.
back, we're
I love
talking,
it.
we're
And
just
I
talking.
love that you said humanity. That's actually one of the things that I left out when I talked about what I kind of imagined for our system.
Mhm.
Like colonial systems are dehumanizing.
Yes,
They don't honor humanity. So going back to like what we need to do as we build anew or build for ourselves is going back to centering humanity. That has always been a part of us. And so going back to that has to be a part of what we do, as we forge a way forward.
I think part of
Sorry.
going back to your original statistics with Eurocentric, uh,
I'm,
huh?
I apologize. Could you hold one moment, please? My
Yeah,
son's at the door.
go
Sorry,
ahead,
1 second.
go ahead. So
Sorry about that.
no
Sorry.
worries. Things happen. It's cool. Um, Back to your original statistic about being 8% of the world's makeup coming from, Europe. And they feel, well, a lot of times it's like, look at this greatness. There's so few of us and we conquered the world. And to me, it's like, listen, no dummies. Nobody else felt the need to conquer the world. Like, we're cool with other people existing. And
Right.
I like,
And y'all conquered through violence and domination and death and greed. Nobody don't want that. Like y'all proud of that? Come on now. Y'all conquered the world through violence.
right. It's like the only way you can get what you wanted was to beat people into submission. Then evidently nobody wanted what you were selling. It's just that simple. If I have to do you physical harm or uproot you from everything you know, gotta detach you from everybody you are, evidently what you selling ain't worth buying. Like,
And where you're coming from is not the greatest. Not
right,
the greatest.
right. But
But
it definitely, go ahead. No, you give
no,
it.
go ahead, go
Go
ahead.
ahead. I
Yeah.
just
8% of the world's landmass. But
Mm-hmm.
so many natural resources were all over and still exist all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
Natural resources and just us and everything. So again, to me, like going back to that and reclaiming what is ours has to be part of it also.
Absolutely. Decolonizing is a large undertaking
Mhm.
in that it requires cooperation, it requires mental fortitude, it
Yep.
requires courage, it requires the desire to shake shit up. Like, but it's necessary
Mm-hmm.
because if these last 2 years haven't shown anybody anything, the way that we've been living, the way that we've been interacting with each other, the way that we've been going about things cannot stay the same.
Right.
Like, whoop de whoop, it got us here, but at what cost? And my thing is, nature always finds a way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we don't exist in a vacuum. There will always be a way. And when the clear out comes, it's going to happen,
Mm.
whether we decide it or not. So I kind of feel, not I kind of, that's what I feel like these last, it's the reset. It's like, all right, y'all have been doing enough. You're on timeout.
Right.
So it's,
Yep. I'll definitely agree. So I think, as a person who's worked within education,
oh,
my wish is that people actually look at it as a reset and took it as a reset, as opposed to like just hurrying to get back to normal and back to what was, because what was not working for many, 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 many people, many of our youth and many of us. So that is my wish, like for within the system,
mm-hmm,
that there is no just going back to normal. I'm seeing a lot of places push to go back to normal right now. To me, that's not the move. Like normal is not working.
right. It's like it's the comfort zone, but whose comfort?
Right. Yep.
So this has been a fabulous conversation. I just want you to know that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I enjoyed being here and
You're
conversing with you.
um, I felt like we cut that short. I know this could go on for so much longer. But even if you're willing, come back again. We can dig
Oh,
into some
sure.
other things.
Anytime.
For the people that would like to keep up with Shauna, you can check out her Instagram. It's worth keeping up with. I
Thank you.
it is. I get in and on there daily. I'm like, oh, she talking good shit. So
Ah!
absolutely. I am a fan. And speaking
Thank
of
you.
being fans, let me tell you, I am a supporter of Melanated Dollars, and I've been peeping your shirts.
Thank you. Thank
I
you.
don't have one yet.
What am I not?
Oh, get in it, get in it. Yes, Black educators. I don't have any yet, but get me one. That's on my to do.
Thank
So
you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
no, you're
I
this
appreciate that.
make pop culture work for you. Okay,
All
we
right.
t-shirt buying, sweatshirt buying fools. I know
All
that's
right.
my that's my uniform around here. Do it, and your graphics are bold. They are uplifting. They're
Thank
so
you.
easy. They're clearly communicating. Like it's good stuff. It
Thank
really
you. Thank
is.
you so much. Thank you. I appreciate that. It
So
all comes from right here. Like I don't nothing in advance. Like what I feel. All right. Put it out, and that's it. And
I love
that's a way of sharing my voice and just
that.
sharing my thoughts and my own reflections personally. So
That's a beautiful thing, and it's necessary.
thank you.
There has to be those of us that are willing to be voices. And oh, listen, we got some fans. We got some
Oh,
fans.
thank you.
I'm gonna get me some, I promise, because I've been eyeing a couple of them.
Uh,
But I usually only hold folks hostage for an hour. We are approaching that time. So, madam, thank you ever so much for coming by. Like I said, I would love to have you on again.
Thank
We
you.
can go deep. We
Yeah, I
can
would
talk about some
love to
things.
be on it. And thank you so much for the conversation and for your really thoughtful, insightful questions.
Oh,
And for everything that you're doing with the People's Pride Project. Again, very necessary, very uplifting, and just connecting people and conversations, and is where we need to be. One of
I,
the places, to continue moving forward. So thank you.
that feels good. Thank you. Because it gets tough. I know you know. When you're doing it by yourself, it's like, dang, nobody's listening to me. But
People are listening, and you're making a difference.
yeah.
It's kind of like what we were talking about before in terms of like trying to force change versus doing what we need to do for ourselves within our area, within our passion and what we have to do. And so I think you're like a perfect example of that. You're starting where you are, doing what you have to do in the way you see fit, following your vision, and that is making an impact. So
I appreciate that very much so. So, this has been a lovely, lovely, fantastic couch conversation with Shauna Brown of Teach for the Culture. Um, y'all catch the replay. You can go watch it on YouTube on the People's Pride Project channel. If you're in the Facebook group, you can watch it there. This woman has knowledge to share. So
thank
get
you.
on her IG, check her out, and we'll catch you guys again next week.
All
So,
right.
bye.
Thank you so much.